For the past few weeks, I've done a couple of lectures on the miracles of Jesus. And we had miracles of Jesus, then we had more miracles of Jesus, and today it will be Miracles of Jesus Part 3. And I'm going to state this up front. I'm hoping that by the time we're through today, we will have covered about 33 to 35% of the miracles, about 1/3 of the miracles, including the last 2 weeks, that Jesus did during his 3.5-year ministry. And when you count these things up, when you recount them individually, it's amazing the ministry that he had and the things that he did and the glory that he gave to his God and Father for being able to do such things. And we're going to reflect on those things. And as we look at these, I want you to think, how does this apply to me? How can I benefit from the miracles that were done nearly 2,000 years ago? How does that help me? So just as a reflection, the first miracle that's recorded in the Bible is recorded in John chapter 2. And it's where Jesus was at a wedding feast and he turned water to wine. And then he healed someone's son in Capernaum at Galilee. That's also recorded in John. And then we see that he drove an evil spirit out of a man in Capernaum. We saw that he healed Peter, the Apostle Peter's mother-in-law. She was sick. And what was interesting is immediately after she was healed, she had a high fever. Immediately after that, she was serving others there. So again, it shows that when Jesus heals you, there's not delay. You don't wait. It's not something that, well, I've healed you, but take 2 aspirin and go to bed and call me in the morning. It's not like that. When Jesus heals you, it's complete. He does it according to the will of his Father. Also, we saw in Matthew chapter 8, Mark chapter 1, Luke chapter 4, that he healed many that were sick and oppressed. And then we had where he performs this miracle where they caught all of these fish, so many that the nets were tearing. They were casting on one side of the boat. He says, well, cast to the other side. And there was a lesson in that. And it's maybe we think that we're doing the will of God. We're ministering in a place where we think we need to be. And God might be saying to us, hey, go over to that house next door or go to that house across the street. Because we've been hammering on the guy on this side of us and we haven't talked to this guy over here, you see. So where we cast our net to be fishers of men is very important. Then we saw that he healed a centurion's paralyzed servant. He healed a paralytic who was let down from the roof. Remember, they opened up the roof and let this guy down through the roof. And then we saw that, let's see, I think that's where we're going to start today. We're going to start in Matthew chapter 12, and that's where we're going to begin. But before we start there, I want you to recognize one thing, and this is so important, because each week I've shown you a text which answers the question, where did Jesus get his authority? Where did he get the ability to be able to do miracles? Now, people that don't understand who Jesus truly is will make a false statement about that. But let's see what the Bible says, rather than state what people falsely say. Where did his authority and his power come from? Take a look at John chapter 5, verses 19 through 21. And this is from the New King James Version there on the PowerPoint. It says, "Then Jesus answered and said to them, 'Most assuredly I say to you, the Son of Man, or the Son, can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself does. And he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will.'" So it says here that the Son does nothing of himself. He does what the Father wants him to do. He does the will of the Father. The authority that Christ has to do these things comes from God, his Father, our God, our Heavenly Father. This is very important. Jesus' identity is missing in the Christian world today, in the whole world today. And very few really know and understand who Jesus is. They don't recognize that his power and authority and his abilities come from his God, from his Father. So important, so important. So let's pick up with this miracle that we find here in Matthew chapter 12. We're just going to read these accounts, and we're going to look at this in each gospel. Now, when I first started in this series, I wasn't reading each gospel, and I thought, as I read them, I said, each one kind of adds a little bit of information that maybe the previous one left out. And it doesn't mean that it's not inspired of God. I'm going to state this again because I stated this in the first lecture. God inspired the Bible. We know that. All Scripture is inspired of God and beneficial for teaching, for reproving, for setting things straight, that the man of God may be fully equipped to do his work, right? So when we think about this, all Scripture is inspired of God. God didn't remove the personality of the individual that was writing the book of the Bible. He allowed their personality to come out when he wrote. For instance, John, in the book of John, he speaks more about love than pretty much anybody else. In the book of Luke, he uses medical terms because he was a doctor more than others. Matthew has some details. He was I think, a tax collector. And so he pays attention to certain things that the others don't pay attention to. So if you and I watch an event, if we were to witness something out here on the highway, we see something occur, you might report something about that incident, maybe the color of the car, maybe there was an accident. You might report the make or model of the car or the color of the car. I might mention the rate of speed they were coming down the road. We're telling the same account, but the details that I leave out, you may fill in with other details. Doesn't mean it's a different story. Doesn't mean it's a different account. It's just you pay attention to certain things that I don't have on my mind at the time. And God allowed each gospel writer and every Bible writer to allow their personality to shine forth. You see that with Paul and those long sentences that he uses. He just goes on and on and on with sentences. That's Paul. That's how he talked. So as we read through this, I think your heart will be warmed at some of the things that we see here. Matthew chapter 12, beginning in verse 9. Now when he had departed from there, that's when Jesus had departed, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. Then he said to them, What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him. So here they are plotting against Jesus because he heals a man on the Sabbath day. Now, one of the things that we know from studying is that the Jews laid restrictions on the Sabbath that really weren't there in the Bible. And this is one of them. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And Jesus is saying, he gives them an example of how much more value is a man than a sheep. If your sheep falls into a pit, wouldn't you get him out on the Sabbath? Well, I love the way he asks questions, and it just takes the rug right out from under them. Because if they answer it out loud, they're going to say, well, he did nothing wrong. So what do? They remain silent. They remain silent. So let's take a look at Mark's account. The same account, Mark records it. And we're going to look at Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. You may find this interesting. It says, And he entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a withered hand. So they watched him closely, whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, Step forward. Then he said to them, Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they kept silent. And when he had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of their hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. So I want you to notice one thing in verse 5. Jesus gets angry. There's nothing wrong with being angry. It's how do we deal with it? What comes out of our mouth? How do we handle the situation? He looked at them with anger, and he didn't say anything to them. He addressed the man, "Stretch out your hand." He healed him right there. And also, if you notice, this question comes up from time to time. I don't know if you've ever been asked this, but in Matthew, and here in Mark chapter 4, it says that Jesus said, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good?" In verse 4, Matthew chapter 3, I'm sorry. Mark chapter 3, verse 4. I'll get it straight here in a minute. Mark chapter 3, verse 4. Sorry, my mind is running ahead. So it says, "Then he," that's Jesus, in Mark 3, 4, said to them, Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, or to save life or to kill?" But keep your finger there. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 12 and verse 11. And I'm showing you this because some people like to say, "Well, the Bible's not clear. The Bible's not clear." But I want you to notice verse 10, rather. It says, "And behold, there was a man who had a withered hand." This is Matthew 12:10. "And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" So here it's saying that they asked him. And in Mark, it's saying that Jesus said to them. But you'll notice it's two different things. They did ask him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" And if you notice what Jesus says in the next verse in Matthew 12, he said to them, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." In Mark's account, in Mark chapter 3, verse 4, Jesus says, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save or to kill?" So you'll notice the question was, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, in verse 10 of Matthew chapter 12. But in chapter 3 of Mark, Jesus says, "Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil?" It's not the same question. The Pharisees were trying to incriminate him. And he basically is saying the same thing in verse 12 of chapter 12 of Matthew as he's saying in Mark chapter 3, verse 4. Had to keep all those numbers straight in my head. So it's not, so many people try to find fault with the Bible. But if we look at it carefully, we see that it's all there. And if we read around it, it makes sense. And sometimes what will happen is somebody might record, well, so-and-so asked a question and so-and-so answered it. But the other person might say, well, a question came up and so-and-so answered with this. They might not even say what the question is. You see? So again, we see the personality or what was important maybe to the writer at that moment coming out in the context of the chapter. But either way, the account is there. It is okay to do a good thing on the Sabbath. Are there things that we shouldn't do on the Sabbath? Well, real quick, let's just go back. I don't have this in my outline, but let's just look at the commandment itself. Exodus chapter 20, it's very clear. Very clear. Exodus chapter 20, beginning in verse 8. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But any seventh day," is that what it says? No. "The seventh day is the Sabbath of Jehovah your God." It doesn't say it's your Sabbath. It doesn't say it's whatever day you pick. It's the seventh day is the Sabbath of Jehovah your God. In it, which day? The seventh day. Let's make that clear. "In it you shall do no work." It doesn't say you shall not heal or do good for your neighbor. It says you shall do no work. You, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. or we could say because, for in 6 days Jehovah made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and rested, not any day of the week, but the seventh day. Therefore, what's therefore mean? Therefore, right? And when you see therefore, say, what's that therefore? What's that therefore? Well, he tells you, therefore, Jehovah blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. It is holy time. The Pharisees knew this here in these accounts. And what they were doing, though, was they were taking it to the extreme, and they were adding things to Scripture that are not there. And a lot of times we will take away from Scripture. I've done it. I've done it many times in my lifetime. Or I might think I know the verse. I did that this morning in Sabbath school. I quoted a verse, but I didn't have it right. When we looked at it, I realized that my wording was wrong. And it was in the book of James about being tempted. And see, it's so easy to happen. But when we see it, let's correct it. And let's recognize what God's word says. And Jesus here makes it clear in these chapters that you can do a good thing on the Sabbath. I don't make it a habit to do anything that it says is restricted on the Sabbath. But here we have this man that's sick. I'm just going to put this into his perspective for modern day. We have this man who has this withered hand, and Jesus heals him on the Sabbath. Jesus was there at that moment. We don't know that he ever met this man before, but he saw the need and he met it on the Sabbath. Suppose I'm outside, I'm heading home, and I see somebody lying in the street. They're laying on the sidewalk. What am I going to do? Well, it's Sabbath. I can't stop and help them. No, I'm going to stop. And let's suppose I pick them up and they say, I haven't had anything to eat for days. Well, guess what? I'm either going to go take them somewhere and get them something to eat, or I'm going to take them to my house and give them some food and prepare it for them. Yes, it's Sabbath. But if your ox is in the ditch or your sheep falls into a ditch, what are you going to do? You're going to get them out. We need to be balanced. I'm not going to go around looking for ways to, let's see, what can I do that I can go into a store on Sabbath or do this or that. It's not like that. You see the need, you meet the need, as long as it's within the will of God. That's the key. So let's look at the same account in Luke. Luke records something here that I thought, it was just an attention to detail that a brother like Luke would pay attention to, having been a physician. Luke chapter 6 is where we're going. Luke chapter 6, and we're going to pick up in verse 6. Luke chapter 6, verse 6. It says, "Now it happened on another Sabbath also that he entered the synagogue and taught. And a man was there whose right hand was withered." You notice the others just said his hand was withered. Luke says it was his right hand. That caught my attention, his right hand. You know, my right hand is my dominant hand. As far as catching or throwing, I'm ambidextrous. I can throw a frisbee or a ball, football, baseball, it doesn't matter, with either hand. I can catch with either hand. But if I'm writing, and when I play the guitar, I'm right-handed, certain things. And Luke picked up on that. So this withered hand, most people are right-handed. Could have been this man's dominant hand that he was without use of. And Luke pays attention. It was his right hand. Verse 7, "So the scribes and Pharisees watched him closely, whether he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might find an accusation against him. But," verse 8, "he knew their thoughts and said to the man who had the withered hand, 'Arise and stand here.' And he arose and stood. Then Jesus said to them, 'I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to destroy?' And when he had looked around at them all, he said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' And he did so, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. But they were filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus." So here are these religious leaders. They see a man that couldn't use his hand, and now he has full use of it. They should have been glorifying God. They should have been happy, this man is healed. But no, they're trying to accuse Jesus of breaking a law that he didn't break. Right in the synagogue. You know, one of the problems might have been Jesus in verse 6. It says, he entered the synagogue and taught. Sometimes the leaders feel like, that's my job. Don't be doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And maybe they were offended by that too. Because he was teaching. But who better to teach? I can't wait to hear Jesus give a sermon. You know, I'm looking forward to that day. I'm sure that we're going to hear him speak. And on some Sabbath, I feel like we'll probably be listening to him give a discourse just like he did the Sermon on the Mount. I look forward to that day. We'll be filled with awe. And then we look at this account here, and they're trying to find a reason to destroy him. In fact, in his question, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do evil, to save life, or destroy? Some translations, I think the NIV says to kill. So think about this. They put Jesus to death the day before the Sabbath. They wanted to get him down off the cross because it wasn't lawful to keep them on the cross on the Sabbath. So it was okay for them to kill the Son of God. But it's not okay to heal someone on the Sabbath? You know, whether it was on the Sabbath or not, they broke a direct command of God. You shall not kill. And they followed through and had it done. So the next miracle that we're going to look at is in Luke chapter 7. And this is the only place that I could find this recorded. Luke chapter 7. And we're going to pick up in verse 11. Now, if I couldn't find it if it was recorded anywhere else. I looked. It says in Luke chapter 7, verse 11. Now it happened the day after that, he went into the city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him in a large crowd. And when he came near the gate of the city, behold, a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother. And she was a widow, and a large crowd from the city was with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and he said to her, do not weep. Then he came and touched the open coffin. And those who carried him stood still, and he said, young man, I say to you, arise. And so he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. Then fear came upon all, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people. And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. Now, when I read this account, and I saw what it said in verse 16, fear came upon all, and they glorified God. Well, that word God is theon. They glorified Jehovah. They glorified Jehovah God, the God of Jesus Christ. And a great prophet has risen up among us, they said. And it says, God has visited his people. Now, for people who don't know the identity of Jesus when they read this, they make an assumption. But when I looked at it in the Apostolic Bible Polyglot, this word is theos. Somehow they must have understood the difference between the divine Father and his divine Son. It was interesting to me when I looked that up. So they glorified God. They recognized that the power that Christ had must have come from his Father, from Jehovah, from the God and Father of Jesus. Now, this was the only place I could find this specific account. Somebody might find it, but I looked, I couldn't find this one anywhere else. So the next miracle we're going to take a look at is back in Matthew. And I'm kind of taking them in the order of books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. So we go back to Matthew chapter 8. And notice what it says beginning in verse 23. Matthew 8:23. Now when he, that's Jesus, got into a boat, his disciples followed him. And suddenly a great tempest arose on the sea, so that the boat was covered with waves, but he, that's Jesus, was asleep. Then all his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us! We are perishing. But he said to them, why are you fearful, O you of little faith? And he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. So the men marveled, saying, who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him? So here, they've been with Jesus for a while. He's on the boat with them. Who can this be? They didn't know. They didn't know who Jesus was. So notice too, it says in verse 25, and suddenly, in this translation, it says a great tempest arose. Does anybody have something else? In Matthew 8:24, some may say wind. But this word tempest, when I looked it up, it means shaking. You know, I always assumed it was a wind. But it means shaking, concussion, earthquake. What causes a tsunami? An earthquake underground is what usually causes a tsunami. It means commotion. And the last definition was gale wind. That was the least of the definitions. But shaking, concussion, earthquake, commotion, gale wind. You know, if the disciples had trusted Jesus, if they knew who they were with, and they truly trusted him, they would have been in peace during that storm. Think about it. If they would have really recognized, this is the Son of God. There's no reason to be afraid. Yeah, the waves are coming in. Jesus is here. Think about that. That's how we should be. The fear at the time of danger revealed that they lacked faith. They had unbelief. They were worried more about saving themselves and forgot who was with them. I mean, when I read the account, how can I draw any other conclusion? And they were actually trying to be self-dependent. We've got to do something. I mean, this storm is, the waves are coming in. And if they turn to him for help in their time of need, which we should do. And really today, this is so important. We often forget when we're going through a trial. We might be going through something we think, I'm alone. I'm all alone. I've had that feeling. When I came to a knowledge of who God is, and I felt like I was the only fish swimming upstream, and all of the current was against me, and all of the other fish were going this way. And I'm just trying to move forward. I felt like I was the only one. And I even said that. I prayed that. Am I the only one? Could I be wrong? Am I wrong? It makes you begin to doubt yourself sometimes if you're the only one. But instead of trusting in our own strength in those times, call on God through Christ Jesus. Ask him to send Jesus into our heart. You see, God gives us hope in Christ. And when we're in that storm, we're in that boat and the waves come crashing upon it, and an earthquake or gale winds and those waves are loading on and it feels like that ship's going to sink, or we might feel like we're going down with the ship. We have to remember that we have an advocate. We have an intercessor, and that's Jesus Christ, the Son of God. We find the same account in the book of Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4, and we're going to read verses 35 through 41. Here we go. Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35. On the same day, when evening had come, he, that's Jesus, said to them, let us cross over to the other side. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. I never realized that until I read this, that there were other boats. I don't know why. I always just pictured one boat until I put these accounts together. Verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep, on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And when he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? So when I saw that, well, along with that word tempest in the other verse in Matthew, and then here, even the wind and the sea obey him, chances are that that storm came up from underneath. There could have been some kind of a concussion or earthquake underground that caused this. Now, we tend to forget, and maybe some of us don't know or have never heard this, but if you go back and you reflect on the book of Job and you see that the devil has some authority or power over these elements in some way. He and his demons can bolster together or pull together, it seems, and can control the wind, according to the book of Job, can control fire falling from heaven, and can do these things. So here, Jesus had the power from where? From within himself? No, the power from his Father, to be able to calm the storm, to be able to settle the waves. If he says it, he's going to do the will of the Father, always. He's not going to do anything independent of the Father or according to his own will. He even prayed that prayer, Father, not my will, but yours be done. At one of the most critical moments in his life, he prayed that prayer. So let's look at the same account in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 8. And you might think, well, this is kind of redundant, but I love the little details that we get from looking at each one of these miracles one by one in each account. Luke chapter 8, beginning in verse 22. Now it happened on a certain day that he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, Let us cross over to the other side of the lake. And they launched out. But as they sailed, he fell asleep, and a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were filling with water and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we are perishing. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. But he said to them, Where is your faith? And they were afraid and marveled, saying to one another, Who can this be? For he commands even the winds and the water that they may obey him. Who can this be? These are the disciples. They're with the Son of God. And who can this be? I mean, this is a question that people ask today. They don't understand who Jesus is. And as we go through the ministry of Christ, we see toward the end of that ministry, some of them are finally getting it. They're finally understanding, this is the Son of God. They should have had this long before, because all of the prophecies had pointed to him coming. They knew these things, but they can't see for what the church is telling them. That's what we're going to call the synagogue. They had been taught certain things. They're getting all this opposition, and they can't see because of the things that maybe they're hearing others say. They see the miracles, but they can't quite wrap their minds around it yet. And he was so patient with them. But he said, Where's your faith? Sometimes I have to ask myself that. Mark, where is your faith? You're going through this. You think you're the only one? Really? You really do? Well, he showed me quickly that I wasn't the only one, and he brought quickly people to the truth of who God is that I was surrounded by, and I'm still surrounded by today. It was about that time that I was thinking, and I really was thinking, am I the only one? It was a lonely feeling. And I got a text from Brother Rick that said, if we believe in a literal sanctuary in the heavens, we cannot believe in a triune God. I'll never forget that. I still have that flip phone, and I still have that message on there, and I look at it from time to time. And I'm going to tell you, every time I see it, it brings tears to my eyes, because that was a major moment for me in my life. And God, through his Son, came to the rescue. So let's look at another miracle. Another miracle, Matthew chapter 8. And then, while we turn to Matthew chapter 8, it wasn't long after that text came that Rick and Mary and I kept studying together. And then Brother Ed says, I want to know what it is that you guys believe. It wasn't too long after that. And then Brother Ed saw it. That's how this little group started. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So Matthew chapter 8. And we're going to begin in verse 28. Matthew 8:28. When he had come to the other side, to the country of, I looked this up, Gergesenes, there met him 2 demon-possessed men coming out of the tombs, exceedingly fierce, so that no one could pass that way. And suddenly they cried out, saying, What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Let me ask you, did the demons know who Jesus is? The demons know. But church leaders don't. That's what the demons want. That's what the devil wants. They don't want us to know the identity of Jesus. Look at it again. Suddenly they cried out, verse 29, saying, What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time? Now, a good way off from them, there was a herd of many swine feeding. So the demons begged him, saying, If you cast us out, permit us to go away into the herd of swine. And he said to them, Go. So when they had come out, they went into the herd of swine, and suddenly the whole herd of swine ran violently down the steep place into the sea and perished in the water. Then those who kept them fled, and they went away into the city and told everything, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to depart from their region. He cures this man, or these men, it says, casting out demons, and they want him to leave the region. Now, the people were so absorbed in earthly things that they didn't care about the love or mercy Jesus showed to this man by healing him. And even today, when we read this account, do you know what people focus on? Why did he cast the demons into the pigs? Whenever I've read this text, every time that has come up, I can say that literally every time that I've read this text in a Bible study situation, that's the question that's asked. Why did he cast them into the pigs? My question to them is, who cares? Does it matter why he cast them in? He did. We know that. Is that really what you want to focus on? You want to focus on why did he? Look at the account. Look at what it says. We're being distracted from a wonderful miracle that has been performed by Jesus by the power that God gave him. He freed this man from demon possession. And we're asking about the pigs? I guess the question I have is, do you trust God's judgment? Jesus judges according to what his Father says. Do you trust God's judgment? Do you think that it was wrong for Jesus to cast those demons into the pigs? Or allow them to go into the pigs? Was it wrong? Would he have done something wrong? Why focus on that part? Focus on what he did. He healed this man that was possessed. These demons had control of these men. And in fact, let's take a look. There's more on this that fills in a lot of gaps here in Mark chapter 5. You'll see what kind of control these demons had on this man. In the one account it says men. In this account it says man. So evidently Mark is focusing on one particular person in this account. Mark chapter 5, we're just going to start in verse 1. It says, "Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one could bind him, not even with chains." Not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. Hold on a minute. You hear how violent this person was? No one could tame him. And Jesus cast the demons out. And these people are saying, "Get away from our region. Get out of here." Anyway, verse 5, "And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshipped him. And he cried out with a loud voice and said, 'What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you may not torment me.' For he said to him, 'Come out of the man, unclean spirit.' Then he asked him, 'What is your name?' And he answered, saying, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.' So he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there near the mountains. So all the demons begged him, saying, 'Send us into the swine that we may enter them.' And at once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out and entered the swine. There were about 2,000, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea." 2,000 of them, 2,000. It says, "So those who fed the swine and fled," so those who fed the swine and fled, and they told it to the city and in the country, and went out to see what it was that had happened. Then they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion, sitting and clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. I would have been afraid of him before this happened. If I see him there in his right mind, why would I be afraid? Verse 16, "And those who saw it told them how it happened to him and who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. And when he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them what things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you.' And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled." So these people were concerned, it seemed, about their pigs. That's what their concern seemed to be. It's the same question. Well, why did he let them go into the pigs? Well, whose side are you on here? I mean, are you going to marvel at the miracle, or do you really care about those pigs? Now, I could say a lot about those pigs, but I'm going to leave that alone. Focus on the miracles that were done. Focus on the miracles. You see, these people that weren't focused on the miracle, they didn't care about that man. They didn't care that here this man was. He was ripping chains apart. Nobody can tame him. And he was running around with no clothing on. And now here he is. He's clothed. He's having a conversation. He's riding in a boat later on with Jesus. He wants to stay with Jesus and be instructed by him. And Jesus says, "No, go tell what happened to you." What a testimony. I wonder what his family and friends, the people that knew him before his possession, and they knew that he had been possessed, what was happening? What a witness. Same account in Luke. Luke covers it in just a few verses. Luke chapter 8. I get excited about these things, friends. I don't know about you, but these miracles, these are facts. This is not made up stuff. This happened. This isn't like some fiction TV show that you see. This isn't smoke and mirrors. This is the power of God through Christ Jesus. That's what we're seeing. and the love of God through Christ Jesus. Luke chapter 8, verse 26. Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he stepped out on the land, there met a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do to you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for it had often seized him. And he was kept under guard, bound with chains and shackles, and he broke the bonds and was driven by the demon into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, saying, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," because many demons had entered him. And they begged him that he would not command them to go out into the abyss. Now a herd of many swine was feeding there on the mountain, so they begged him that they would permit them to enter them. And he permitted them. Then the demons went out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. When those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what had happened, and came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. They also who had seen it, told them by what means he who had been demon-possessed was healed. Then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear, and he got into the boat and returned. Now the man from whom the demons had departed begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your own house and tell what great things God has done for you." And he went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. So Jesus is putting the emphasis on his Father. Look at the great things God has done for you. We call them miracles of Jesus. Yes, Jesus was the one that was here doing those things, but by the power that God gave him to do it, by the authority that God had given him to do it. And the one thing that all three of these accounts have in common is that it seems that the demons know the identity of Jesus Christ, but the religious leaders don't. It seems that the demons in the Bible here know the identity of Jesus Christ, but when the Christian reads it, they don't see you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. They don't see Jesus, the Son of God. They see something completely different. They don't see the words that are written right here. They're focusing on the pigs. Really, that's what it is. It's something unclean when we put Jesus in a place where he doesn't belong. We're doing something unclean. So how did Jesus do these things once again? How were they done? Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Look at a few closing verses here. John chapter 5, we started with this text, 19 through 21. Then Jesus answered and said to them, "Most assuredly I say to you, the Son of Man can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself does. And he will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. For as the Father raises the dead and gives life to them, even so the Son gives life to whom he will." The Father raises the dead. That's what it says right here. The Father does it. He can do it through Jesus Christ. He could do it through the apostles and the prophets of old. He can have people resurrected. Another text, John chapter 5, verses 24 through 27. "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that heareth my word and believeth on him that sent me hath everlasting life, and shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death unto life. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they that hear shall live. For as the Father hath life in himself, so hath he given to the Son to have life in himself, and hath given him authority to execute judgment also, because he is the Son of Man. So Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the Son of Man. He was the Son of God before he was the Son of Man. He became the Son of Man when he was born of Mary. And so he's doing all of these miracles on earth as the Son of God and the Son of Man. And he's doing it by the authority that God gave him, by the power that God gave him. It says again, if you go back to that PowerPoint, verse 25, or verse 26, for as the Father hath life in himself, so hath he given to the Son to have life in himself. So even the life of Christ comes from the Father. The demons knew this. As Christians, we should know it. Our closing text for Jesus, where did he get this authority and power to do the miracles? Acts 22:22. This was our scripture reading for today. Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested by God to you by miracles, wonders, and signs, which God did through him in your midst, as you yourselves also know. The miracles of Jesus are miracles from God. We give all these attributes to Jesus so many times in the Christian church. The Christian denomination as a whole, worldwide, gives all of these attributes to Jesus, and they stand on that alone. But this is not right. The attributes of Jesus came from his Father. You've heard the saying, like Father, like Son. Jesus could say, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And he could say that because he's the express image of the Father's person. You know, I say, unfortunately, I say it kind of in a meaningful way in some ways, and in a way of I'm glad in others. My relatives and people that have known my dad since he was my age and younger, they see me and they say, you are exactly like your dad. And I say, oh, no. I'm sure he's watching. But in some ways I say that, and in other ways I say, I'm glad in some ways that I'm like my dad. And in other ways, I guess all of us have that feeling. We don't want to be like our parents in certain ways. But in every way, Jesus could be like his Father and wanted to reflect his Father. Because there's no bad qualities in the God that we worship. There was no bad qualities in Jesus Christ when he was walking here with those men. The anger that he felt was righteous anger. It was justified anger. It was there because he knew the hearts of those people by the power that God gave him to read the heart. Don't forget this, friends, as we go through this series. Like I said, we're about a third of the way through. And as we go through these miracles, remember where the power and the ability to do these things come from. So many times we take credit ourselves for things that we do. But I can't do anything if it wasn't for God and his Son. I wouldn't be here. None of us would. None of us would be alive if it wasn't for the Father and his Son. The Son wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for his Father. It was God who brought him forth. It was God who raised him from the dead. The identity of Jesus is so important. And the miracles of Jesus should endear us evermore, not only to the Son of God, Jesus Christ, but to his God and his Father, the living God, Jehovah.